First of all, thank you to the Economist team for welcoming me back, and a special thank you to Nectaria and her superb team. What I thought I would do with the very limited time that we have here on stage is to try to provide strategic context for what is happening in Washington and how that plays out with the larger regions that we're discussing here in the European Union and in the Middle East. And Anne Applebaum earlier today referenced the National Security Strategy, which was released by the White House in late November. Then the State Department released its agency strategic plan right around New Year's. Shortly afterwards, I think the end of January, the Defense Department released the National Defense Strategy. These are all the unclassified versions are available online. So those of you who want to get a better, realistic understanding of the Trump administration's thinking, it's all available online. But I would also recommend, especially for those of you in the business community, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, issued a very prominent speech the end of June at the Economic Club of New York. And I consider Scott Bessent to be maybe the Trump whisperer above all of the other secretaries, more than Secretary Rubio, more than Secretary Hegseth. Follow what Scott Bessent is saying and doing. And what the Treasury Secretary spoke about was the importance of economic power as national power. And whether it's a country or whether it's a bloc of countries, if there is not economic power, there is no genuine national power or institutional power, hard or soft, to be able to project anywhere in the world. And I think that's part of the thinking right now with the Trump administration. The administration is looking to rebuild American economic power. It was hollowed out for the last 30 years. We made very foolish mistakes in America, Democrats and Republicans alike, outsourcing our industry to China and to other countries in Southeast Asia. We thought that we could become a powerhouse simply with services, health, education, and the like, and we forgot about industry and manufacturing. And now, as several of the speakers, including from the Greek government, mentioned earlier today, how important it is to be not just energy resilient, energy secure, and maybe we'll go into this in the Q&A, Joan, because I still haven't heard anyone today talk about nuclear power in Europe. You're talking about solar and wind power, which is great for Greece, but an utter failure for Germany, the United Kingdom, and other countries in Northern Europe. You need gas, you need oil, you need nuclear. And then you also add solar and renewable like wind. But I haven't heard any of this. And so energy resilience, energy security, energy redundancy to have manufacturing and industrial power, whether you're Greece or any other country in the Eastern Mediterranean. Technological power, obviously military power. And all of this really is undergoing a transformation under the current administration, not because Donald Trump is president, he's simply the accelerant for this, but in 2007, Vladimir Putin said, if you bring Ukraine into NATO, you're crossing a red line that you will regret. And in 2012, Xi Jinping became the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party. We really haven't talked a lot about the China threat to the international order all day today. That really is the #1 long-term threat to Europe's viability. And also in the Middle East, it's part of the thinking where the administration is looking to build alliances with like-minded countries, whether they're democracies in the European Union, whether they're authoritarian regimes or sheikdoms in the Middle East. We're not promoting democracy in the Middle East anymore because that failed in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's not happening, at least for the next several years. What we want is resilient, powerful countries that can defend themselves to the best of their ability and then have the United States come in and provide that additional security umbrella. The nuclear umbrella for Europe against Russia, to work with our Gulf Arab allies and Israel together to promote a denuclearized or, frankly, non-nuclear Iran, because the great fear, sir, in Washington is if Iran goes nuclear, Saudi Arabia has said very clearly they'll attain nuclear weapons. And then Egypt, as the largest, most populous Muslim country in the Middle East, will likely want to secure its own independent nuclear arsenal. Turkey, even though it's a NATO country operating under the US nuclear umbrella, may then, as the most powerful military in the Muslim world, say, we should have a nuclear weapons arsenal. And then what are we dealing with cascading nuclear proliferation in the most war-torn region of the world? So these are some of the things that we're looking to sort of adapt to. And I think the larger concern here is, how do we come to grips with the fact that the world has been changing before our eyes for 20 years, whether it's the Russian threat against Europe, the Chinese threat against the global economy, and a future that is either going to be freedom-based and liberty-based or a techno-authoritarian surveillance system a la what the Chinese Communist Party has imposed on 1.3 billion people in China. And this is an area where we need to work together, the United States and Europe, on a future that's based on human rights and individual dignity and human flourishing. I heard a lot about democracy earlier today, and I'll wrap up here, Jim. Democracy, in my estimation, is not the end to itself. Democracy is the means by which governments provide for human flourishing for their citizens. And if we only talk about democracy, but we don't talk about the well-being of the citizens of every nation state, then democracy is a failure. So I close with the great Winston Churchill's quote that democracy is the worst form of government in the world, except every other one that has ever been tried. And then we'll come back to the Q&A. So thank you.